Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. It's September 27th. Now, for this episode, we're going to go all into the Penguins 6-2 preseason loss to the Red Wings. The Penguins are now 1-2 on the preseason. No, this is not going to be an overreaction episode or anything like that with 2 weeks to go until the regular season. I do have a special guest to break down this game, look at the negatives, look at the positives, and all that jazz. That's coming up right after this drop.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm your host, Hunter Hodes. You want to follow me on Twitter, Hunter Hodes. You can also follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. And of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen of the day. Joining me now, he hasn't joined the show in a while, was able to get some better lighting, at least for the YouTube audience, is Doug Glackey, host of the Forechecking TV and one of my favorite Penguins follows from Penguins Twitter. Doug, we'll just jump right into it. So a 6-2 loss to the Red Wings tonight. Saw some weird overreactions from people saying, well, this is what happens when you bring the same team back. And I think Danny Shirey quote tweeted a couple of them. I'm just like, all right, people, there's still 2 weeks to go until the regular season starts. Overall, what is your, biggest thought coming out of this game?
I mean, my thing is this, is like preseason games don't really matter. Various players throughout the top six looked pretty good this evening. I think that's a big thing that we're looking for, very underrated game for Brock McGinn, even looking good outside of scoring the goal. I think that that's something that we need to look forward to and look for going into the year, especially with the fact that we really haven't seen Brock McGinn at his best. Last year he had the injuries, he had the COVID absence as well. And I feel like he was not the same player ever since he had to sit out from having COVID. I feel like he had a really nice start to the year last year, and then he got sick and he just couldn't rebound. And I feel like we could say that for a good bit for several different players from last year's roster. But I think, Drew O'Connor looked okay. Jason Zucker looked pretty good, had a nice little play on that pass for the Russ goal. And I think, and obviously we'll get into the blue line in a little bit, but I think, at this point, like in games like that, you just look for individual performances, especially in a preseason game.
Yeah, I mean, for me with the preseason, the results really don't matter. I couldn't give two craps if they lose a preseason game. And yeah, I know some people may come in to tell me and they're like, well, a lot of the regulars just lost to like a C version of the Red Wings. It's like, okay, cool. Those guys are fighting for jobs. A lot of these Penguin players are going to be on the 23-man roster to open the season. They look like they were playing hungover after they got drunk off their butts last night. It's September 27th. There are 16 days until the regular season starts for this team. I really don't think they care that much. And speaking of Brock McGinn, funny enough, Doug, I was looking at the game scores tonight from Hockey Stat Cards. He led all Penguins players in game score with almost a little over about, I think it was like 1.7, something like that. And funny enough, Brian Rust was right behind him. And then Jason Zucker was right behind him. So, and that honestly matches up with the eye test. McGinn had that wicked shot on display tonight that opened up the scoring. That's more of what I want to see from him this regular season. I definitely do agree that, his COVID, and I think the injury that he also had down the stretch really hampered him. He didn't look like the same player in the playoffs. He's able to score double-digit goals, which is good, but, he wasn't able last year, I guess, to justify the contract that the Penguins gave him. But, if he's able to stay healthy and, fire the puck like he did tonight, I definitely think, he could be someone that, has a much better second year on that 4-year term than the first year. Brian Rust, really nice goal off a feed from Jason Zucker, was able to roof that to make it 4-2. I thought he was flying all over the ice. And, the same for Zucker. I think he's had a really good camp so far. He's had a really good preseason. I think he has something to prove. After he's just been banged up a lot throughout his Penguins tenure. He's someone that just really can't catch a break, to be honest with you. So the fact that he's playing well right now is also doing well in practices. I think that I hope that it bodes well for the regular season. We also what happened last year with Kasperi Kapanen. This was the exact same thing. Didn't play well in the regular season, but I think Zucker has more talent than him, and I think he can has a better chance of scoring 20 to 25 or something like that. But those were I think definitely the three main players that stood out to me, and we'll get to Ty Smith in a little bit, but I think those are the main three that stood out to me.
Yeah, I agree, and to touch on Brock McGinn real quick, I feel like to live up to that contract, it's not really that hard with how good of a defensive presence he is on the ice. All he really has to do is score like 12 to 15 goals a year, and the contract pretty much pays for itself. As for Jason Zucker, this is a big year for him. He's in a contract year. He's been hurt pretty much the entire time that he's been in Pittsburgh. And, obviously I feel like expectations have changed ever since he's gotten here. Once we got him from Minnesota, everybody was like, okay, he's going to be a 30-goal guy every single year, play with Sid, play with Gino. But now I think we're to a point now where it's like, you just want Jason Zucker to stay healthy. And I think we're all hoping for him to be a really good third wheel for that Evgeny Malkin line. Yeah. I think that you can tell that Mike Sullivan's starting to do the lines in pairs again. We saw that in a Seth Rohrabaugh article last week. And I think, with the doing the lines in pairs, as long as Zucker's able to hold his head above water on a line with Malkin and Rust, everything should be okay with his play and the expectation for the player.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with that. And, we were able to see Zucker, Malkin, Rust tonight. They had better numbers than the Gensel, Crosby, Raquel line. If you go to natural stat trick, Gensel was on the ice for only 4 shot attempts for 11 shot attempts against. Sid, not much better, 4 chances for 4 shot attempts for 10 shot attempts against for a 28% Corsi percentage. And Rickard Raquel's possession numbers only 36%. So not the greatest debut for that line. I'm not really too concerned. I think they're going to want to give both lines more reps, especially in camp and in the preseason. But, I like the potential that both have. We all know how good Rust is with Malkin, underlying numbers wise, well over 50% in shot attempts per 60, scoring chances, high danger percentage, all that stuff. And, Raquel last year, I know it was a very small sample size, but he looked like a natural fit with Sid and Jake. And, this game notwithstanding, the numbers have been pretty solid throughout that. And, for the game score tonight, that also, lived up as well. I think Crosby had the 3rd worst game score. Gensel was the 4th worst, and Raquel was the 5th worst. So a lot of some of the Penguins' top players, not good performances tonight. But am I going to read that much into it? No, I'm not, because I'm sure if they all play again in the next game, if they do, I think their numbers would be a lot better, to say the least.
Yeah, I agree. And the truth is the people that are reading into it already have a narrative out against this team, which is what it is, and I just want to touch on, them breaking up the Gensel Malkin or the Gensel Crosby Rust line. I think that's going to be really, really good. In theory, you just have to wait and see if it works. It's all about lineup distribution. I feel like whenever Russ is on the top line with Sid and Jake, it does make them a little top heavy. So if you can put him with Malkin as a way to keep I'm not worried about like the so-called get Malkin going. I think Malkin's going to have a great year. But if you put Brian Rust with Malkin in an effort to unlock Jason Zucker in this offense, I feel like a lot of things are going to take care of itself from a scoring depth perspective. I know everybody's worried about Jeff Carter, but Danton Heinen and Kasperi Kapanen are great third wheels for him in theory, if it does indeed end up being the third line. And, like that's the thing is like you got to spread the talent out throughout all four lines. I feel like that's something that Mike Sullivan got away from a little bit for over the past 2 to 3 years, ever since we got into the COVID year and the COVID break. And I'm looking forward to this season. Hopefully, they're able to stick with it, and he doesn't have to shuffle the lines early on in the year.
That would be a best case scenario. Also, it would be awesome if the team could stay healthy, but this is the Pittsburgh Penguins we're talking about here, so I'm sure there's probably bound to be some injuries at some point. Still a lot more to get to for this episode, including thoughts on Ty Smith and how smooth his skating is, the special teams. That's all coming up a bit later on. Maybe one of those topics will be coming up right after this commercial break. But before we get to that, we got to discuss BetOnline. It's your number one source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, golf. You can head to BetOnline or use your phone to learn more. That is BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, I'm back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm your host, Hunter Hodes. I have Doug Lackey here as my guest. So, Doug, let's start with, I guess, the negative here about this and special teams. Penguins had 8 or 9 power plays tonight. Didn't convert on a single one, which is, hard to believe, even though it's a preseason game. Looked out of sorts on the power. Both units looked out of sorts, disjointed. I tweeted at times it looked like they were just trying to pass the puck into the net. Looked like they were trying to Harlem Globetrotters against just a bunch of kids. And I guess that's kind of expected in a way. They're just trying to look for the perfect play against a lot of players that aren't going to be in the NHL this year. But sometimes less is more, and they needed to just get back to basics. I think Mike Sullivan talked about it after the game that they haven't had a lot of reps, but certainly they are going to now because this performance was definitely not that inspiring. I didn't really notice anything different systematically, which is kind of weird considering how average the unit was last year. What did you think of the power play, and are you any concerned about it going into the season?
I am concerned about it, and I feel like this is something that we've been discussing off and on for quite a few years now. The big issue is like the special teams aspect of the team is starting to get stale a little bit. And it's not I don't really think it's a personnel issue either. I mean, you have 3 of the most talented players of this era on the ice with 2 of your star counterparts. You should be able to put the puck in the back of the net. Yeah. This is something that, in my opinion, has been hindering them ever since they traded Kessel away. For whatever reason, Phil Kessel was just so talented on the power play that he was able to really unlock the true potential of the Penguins power play during his time here, and I don't really think you need to switch it up. And the truth is like, if you were to switch something up from a player personnel perspective, the only thing you're probably really switching up is like Rust for Raquel, and I really don't think there's any other options. And it's all about like, I think it comes down to coaching, same with the PK. The PK is going to be a major point of contention this year, I fear, because Tristan Jarry was incredible in penalty kill situations last year, and it made the penalty kill look way better than what it actually is, in my opinion.
It surely did. Backtracking a little bit to get back to the power play, I'm going to get to that in just a second because I have a stat to share with all the listeners here about the penalty kill and stuff and Tristan Jarry. It's just, it definitely, I think it does come down to coaching. I saw the same stuff that we saw last season, passes off the end boards going back with the drop pass, just really bad passes going into the zone, not a lot of clean zone entries. That's been a problem for them the last year or two. And then once they get into the zone, it's just, pass to you. I'm going to pass back. And then I'll pass again. And then another pass. And it's like, not taking enough shots to the net. You're trying to pass it in. You're trying to Harlem Globetrotter kids. it's not going to work. And, again, Mike Sullivan talked about it after the game. He said they haven't had a lot of reps in games and camp and all that just because, lately the schedule's been really busy. Okay, well, maybe it's time to start giving you some reps because 0 for 8, 0 for 9 against a bunch of players who are probably not going to be in the NHL, definitely a little bit cause for concern. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, the power play is going to stink this year and all that. I mean, there's going to be hot moments for this unit just because of the talent that they have. And there's also going to be some bad moments. But I think the big key is to manage those bad moments and for them to not pop up as much as they did last year and to maybe make some changes to the system where, you're making it easier for the players to gain entry to the zone with the puck. And, you're preaching, a more of a shoot first mentality. I know these players have been doing a power play for almost 2 decades of their life at this point, probably longer in the NHL almost, but less is more. And, I didn't see that tonight against a PK unit that, is honestly not that good, to be honest with you. And, for the penalty kill, here's a stat for you, Doug, and all the listeners. Tristan Jarry ranked in the 99th percentile last year in goals saved above expected in penalty kill situations. He bailed their butts out more times than not and made that unit, as you said, look better than it did. And, what happened when he got hurt down the stretch and in the playoffs? The numbers regress because, Louis Domingue is in net. I mean, obviously Louis Domingue is not Tristan Jarry, but still, when you put someone else in net that is not in the 99th percentile for goals saved above expected on the penalty kill, you're not going to have those same kind of results. And also, for as good as I think Jarry is going to be this year, one of my bold predictions that he's going to be a Vezina finalist. I don't know if he's going to rank in the 99th percentile for goals saved above expected on the penalty kill. So that is a unit that needs to be better. I saw some of the same things I saw during the playoffs and during parts of the regular season where they're just not being aggressive enough. They're sitting back. They're allowing players to take shots from anywhere on the ice. Didn't really see anything different systematically on that unit too. I know the Penguins just gave their 2 assistant coaches some extensions, but, those extensions, they're not going to look the prettiest if the special team units that they coach have more of the same results this season.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing with the PK is it all comes down to the PK groupings and the PK personnel. I mean, we can already pretty much predict what the penalty kill is going to be opening night. Obviously, you're going to have McGinn and Bluger, which is okay. But, it's probably going to be Jeff Carter and Drew O'Connor on that second unit, which is neither here nor there. But in terms of the aggressiveness aspect, I feel like if they finally started using Kasperi Kapanen in penalty kill situations, you could amp up the aggressiveness because he's fast enough and he's enough of a speed demon. He's able to wreak havoc on a penalty kill, in my opinion. He did that a lot in Toronto. He was pretty good at it in Toronto. I think it's something worth exploring at least. Because you need to spice it up a little bit, I think. I mean, Jeff Carter's going to have to center, but if Drew O'Connor struggles out of the gate on the PK, I would look to see that, and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think another player who, I don't know if you mentioned him yet, maybe you did, but I think Kasperi Kapanen should be getting more PK minutes when he's healthy. I know he was sick tonight. He played really good on that unit in Toronto. Had some good results. I think it was 2018-19 when he had probably his best NHL season. I would look for him to potentially get more minutes, whether it's on the first. I don't think it'll be on the first unit, but second unit, maybe a third kind of unit of players that go out there. I think that would also be really good. Maybe gets him more confidence, gets him more opportunities to put the puck in the back of the net. He can use his speed to his advantage. I've been a big proponent of that throughout the offseason, and I think that would really make a lot of sense. What would you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like with PK units, you always have that fifth guy you rotate in. He should be that fifth guy. I feel like last year they were using Brian Boyle and Evan Rodriguez in that same type of role. And both those players have departed. So somebody else has to step up. And, it's probably going to be it could be Kapanen, but also you're going to probably see a rotation of Brian Rust in there, which would be okay. But I would prefer them to defer to Kapanen in that situation because I don't want them to take away from Brian Rust at 5v5 and on the power play to use him on the PK.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair to say. Definitely, I think a good idea to, to put in the back burner, say, at least, we'll have to see if maybe he gets some PK time when he inevitably plays in another preseason game. Still have a little more to get to for this episode, including some talk on Ty Smith and the rest of the defensemen. That's all coming up right after our final commercial break. All right, I'm back in this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter, Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter, @LO_Penguins. And of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen of the day. So, Doug, let's get to the defense. We saw potentially the 6 players that are going to be on the opening night. Opening night. Well, definitely be on the opening night roster, I would think, but definitely potentially all starting on opening night. Dumoulin, Letang, Pettersson, Petrie, Smith, and Ruta. I know you were texting me about this, but I loved watching Ty Smith tonight. His skating is so fluid. Definitely, I think the best attribute of his game. Sometimes wasn't making the best decision coming up the ice with the puck, but I mean, his skating is something to behold. It was really nice seeing him quarterback the second power play unit. I think in terms of game score, if I look at it here, he, defensively, he ranked positive. Offensively, he did not. Him and Jan Ruta were a bit negative in that category. So kind of a wash in those kind of areas. But, through a couple of preseason games so far, I've been really impressed with him. With his playmaking ability in the offensive zone, his skating ability. Defensively, there will obviously be some things to clean up a little bit. They're sheltering on the third pairing like they did with Mike Matheson, which is good. What have you seen from Smith so far that's really jumped out at you?
I feel like a lot of the things that we've seen thus far have been very encouraging, especially from the skating aspect. And it's not just like good fluid skating. Like, I feel like he's very, very explosive, especially skating zone entries into the offensive zone. Obviously this is going to be a process with him. His numbers were really, really bad last year. And I think, there's still going to be those moments where he does look bad, but I feel like the good is going to far outweigh the bad. Especially with him potentially quarterbacking the second unit. I mean, we don't really know what it's fully going to look like once camp breaks, but I'd look to see him quarterback that second unit. I feel like you need to be able to. I feel like the best thing for him is to have him use his offensive instincts, especially on the power play. And another thing that I really want to see is I want him to play the right side. I want Ruda on the left and Ty on the right. I think that you need to open up the backdoor passes, especially when he's out being deployed with Sid's line. This is nothing new for Sidney Crosby, hitting up a defenseman with the backdoor pass. I think that it would really be a good secondary option for scoring, potentially, if it works. So there's my hot take of the episode, Hunter.
There is a hot take right there. So you would have both of them on their offside, basically, in sheltered minutes.
Yes, and I mean, Ruda has played the left side before, and Ty Smith played a lot of the right side while he was playing junior in Spokane. And if I do believe his rookie season in New Jersey was played predominantly on the right side as well. So I think it's something worth exploring, at least to start.
That would be interesting. I'm not really sure if Mike is going to go for it just because, excuse me. He usually likes playing, players on their strong side, except Mark Friedman. Like he loves playing him on the left for some reason, even though he's a righty. So it could have a chance of happening, but I think it's, I guess, more likely that he'll probably start on his strong side. Moving gears a little bit, Doug, Brian Dumoulin, was bad game score tonight, at least worst among all Penguins defensemen, almost a -1 when it comes to offense and defense. Letang didn't have a good performance, but I'm not really worried about him. But Dumoulin lot of concern about him coming into this season. Last year, his contract. I was one of the people that thought, he should be the one to go this offseason, even though it would have been interesting to see how they would have replaced him. Definitely not an encouraging performance. I think overall his skating looked a step slow. He just hasn't been the same since another long-term injury. And I think, that has the potential to sadly rear its ugly head again this season just because he wasn't good last year. I think of all players that played tonight, the one player I'm actually most concerned about, even though it's a preseason game, is Brian Dumoulin.
I totally agree with you there, and the issue is it's always those defensemen that play the style that Dumoulin plays. They tend to get injured very frequently, and then their play just suddenly falls off a cliff once they get to this age plateau that Dumoulin's at right now. And that's the issue. Like the skate, it was blatantly obvious the skating was not good. And I think, it's a cause for concern because the last thing you want is for a player to be sinking Crystal Tang, especially with how good of a year he had last year. And the main issue right now is like, how the hell do you replace him? Like, if you do have to pull the plug, how do you really replace him? Because Pedersen looks like he's going to be partnered with Petrie. And I think that that's something that needs to happen. And you're not going to put Ty Smith up there. Like, there's no way. That would be a disaster.
You're not going to put POJ up there either.
No. So really, like, what are you going to have to, what do you do?
They would have to almost trade for someone at some point, but they also have 9 defensemen right now, and I don't think they really want to do that again. So it's just a tough problem that what they're going to do, I think they're going to have to hope beyond hope that last year was just a fluke and that he can get back to his normal self. But if not, they might be up a creek on the top pairing this year, because that was last year was, I think, the first year where we really saw that pairing struggle beyond belief, no matter what the situation was.
Yes, I agree. And it's even scarier because you think of it like, once we get into the second half of the year, what exactly is that going to look like? And you're right. I mean, they are, for lack of a better term, they're screwed. Like they have to stick with Dumoulin, because you're not going to stick Mark Friedman up there. You're not sticking Chad Ruedel on his offside. And as much as I want to see POJ play, putting him up there with Chris Letang at this point would be putting him in a position to fail.
Yeah, I mean, they tried that, I think, a couple seasons ago, and the underlying numbers were not pretty. I think the possession was below 50%. Scoring chances were below 50. That was when the Penguins had, I think, a lot of defensemen hurt or out to COVID. It wasn't pretty. Doug, you got anything else to add about this game? Any overreactions or anything with 2 weeks to go, or do you think we covered everything? Just wanted to give you the floor one more time.
No real overreactions here. One thing I'm curious about, though, is Drake Caggiula. Do you think he has a spot on this roster?
I'm intrigued about him.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm definitely. Sorry to interrupt you. I'll let you finish up after this. I mean, I'm intrigued about the possibility. I thought he played fine tonight. Didn't really stand out either way, but that's basically kind of what a tweener player does. He's on a 2-way contract, so he's waiver exempt. He doesn't need to pass through waivers to go back down to Wilkes-Barre. I'm more excited about him than I am about someone like Josh Archibald. I think he brings more offense to his game. I think he's better defensively. I think I don't think Archibald is guaranteed anything at this point anyway, even though he's on a one-way deal. But Caggiula, the fact that he was in tonight, I don't know if he would have been out if Kapanen would have played, but the fact that he was in and someone like Archibald was out, I think that's definitely something to monitor. But I'm sure they're all going to get reps in the final 3 preseason games as they try to figure this thing out.
Yeah, I feel like if anyone would have sat tonight, it would have probably been Radim Zahorna. But I'm also very intrigued about Caggiula, because like he just seems like one of those players where it's like, if you get him into this structured Mike Sullivan system, you could probably stick him on a 4th line with Teddy Blueger and Brock McGinn, and he not look out of place and potentially score some goals here and there and be a good asset to the team.
That would certainly be good. We'll have to see if he keeps playing well in camp and plays well in preseason. But he definitely has a decent shot at making this roster out of camp, and I'm certainly excited about that. But I think that wraps up tonight's episode. Doug, I don't really have too many other thoughts about this game. After all, again, it's just the preseason. But Doug, for those that have never listened to you before, let everyone know where they can follow you and what's coming up on the show.
All right, you can follow my personal Twitter at Doug_Gladkey, and then follow Forechecking TV on Twitter at Forechecking TV, and be sure to subscribe to Forechecking TV on YouTube. Scotty and I have really resolved our work schedule differences here, and we're going to start recording every single weekend on Saturdays, and it'll be posted every week. So there you go.
Yeah, go check out the show. They do a really good job there. As for this show, I'll be back with another episode for you all on Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday. We're just about 2 weeks away from the start of the regular season, and I'm glad we're talking about hockey games at this point, even though it's preseason. That doesn't mean anything, but still beats beating the same drum about the same topic 3 to 5 days a week. That's for sure. But again, thank you all so much for listening, and I'll talk with you all on Wednesday.